Good afternoon, everyone. This is another installment of Sobering Truths. I'm Joyce Cook, and we have Iris Stevens and Bob Hester along. And we're going to talk about something, it, the Johnson Amendment, and how it has maybe given a chill to speech, free speech. For generations, pastors in America spoke boldly about the moral issues of their day. From slavery to civil rights to the temperance movement, the church often helped shape public conscience. But today, many pastors hesitate to address controversial issues that intersect with politics. One reason often cited is the Johnson Amendment, a provision in the U.S. tax code passed in 1954 that prohibits tax exempt organizations, including churches, from endorsing political candidates. Critics say that the amendment has created a chilling effect, causing pastors to avoid discussing policy issues for fear of jeopardizing their church's tax exempt status. In this episode of Sobering Truth, we asked an important question. Has the Johnson Amendment indirectly silenced the church on moral issues like alcohol abuse? And if pastors remain silent, who will warn society about the physical, social, and spiritual consequences of alcohol? And Iris, do you know what have you learned about the Johnson Amendment, and what's your
Well, I
opinion
know
of
it
it?
was, my opinion is very low. It was stuck in the tax code because, everybody talks about the Johnson Amendment, and I've heard, since I was a kid, heard, well, we can't talk about that. We can't do, the Johnson Amendment, et cetera, et cetera. And it sounds almost like they believe that the stormtroopers will knock on the door of the church and come in and get people. Basically, what it would do is if a church is found, and as far as I know, from the last time I read about there has never been a successfully prosecuted church from the Johnson Amendment. Now, that was factual when I read it, and I think that's pretty. I think it's pretty evident that most of this country doesn't really approve of attacking churches for supporting, candidates that they believe in. But anyway,
Right.
as far as I know, there had not been a successful prosecution of churches. But the only thing they can do is prosecute them based on taxes and remove their 501c3, and if they are encoded that way, which means they might have to start paying taxes. Well,
Right.
I don't know about you, but as far as my free speech goes, I'll pay taxes to protect it.
Amen.
I
Yes.
can't imagine that we've got as many preachers, and that may not be currently, but within the recent past, we've had as many preachers who shut up and hid in the corner because they were afraid of the Johnson administration. And by the way, that was President Johnson, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who probably is, I think, probably one of the most evil people that we've
Right.
ever had in government.
I
Right.
agree. I don't. I'm not fond of him. Uh, well, do you think it was originally intended to apply to churches or mainly to political organizations?
I don't think it was originally intended for churches, but it didn't take clever politicians very long to say, "Hey, look, if this church, says they don't want Boss Hog, they want somebody else, then we can attack them with that," and that's how that happened. But I think it was a primarily intended to be political organizations and groups like that, other charitable type groups.
Right. I found something that's surprising facts about the Johnson Amendment, and one says the amendment was it was not originally aimed at churches. It was introduced during a dispute with two nonprofit organizations opposing Johnson's reelection campaign. So,
Yeah.
well, Bob, I want to hear from you. Do you think the Johnson Amendment made pastors reluctant to speak about alcohol policy or other public health issues?
I think there's two ways you can look at it. It may have some legitimately, but it should not have. I not sure, but what a lot of pastors didn't just hide behind it to keep from speaking out on issues that could maybe divide their church, like abortion or something like that, that they felt like it would kind of disrupt things a little bit in their congregation and maybe cost them their job. I'm not sure that's not part of it. The black churches, and even though most of them in the past, I think that's changing now, were supportive of candidates that we were not necessarily supportive of, they did not hesitate and they never ceased. And they were bold about supporting candidates. And they never, I'm not aware, and Iris said she's never heard of anybody being prosecuted. I've never heard of anything happening to those churches. And I'd say most of them spoke out and supported certain candidates.
Right. Well, I think, but I don't know. Who knows? But you would like to think that if, on either side, whoever they favored, that American people would just rise up and say, no, you can't do that, to a church if that started happening.
Well,
But actually, your political operatives were the first ones to pressure it, because it says, the amendment basically says you can't support candidates. It's never said you couldn't support issues.
right.
But look at the number of churches and pastors who have not supported issues because of the Johnson Amendment. And that's what I agree with Bob. They hid behind that because when you look at what it actually says, it does not say that.
For anybody to believe that pastors, congregation churches, whoever, could not speak out on moral issues, for anybody to believe that is incomprehensible to me. How could you not? I mean, that is our responsibility, Christians' responsibility, to say, no, this is wrong, this is bad. And for them not to do that openly and publicly is just, I can't grasp it. It almost has to be that they didn't want to, because if they had the conviction for it, they would speak out anyway, just like the black churches did in supporting candidates and that sort of thing. I'm not talking about even supporting candidates, but I'm talking about, like you mentioned, just speaking out on the issues, on the moral issues, alcohol and abortion, things like that, strongly. Matter of fact, the churches that I'm aware of that where the pastors spoke out on these things strongly were the fastest growing churches around. I know Brother Rex here in Jonesboro, Arkansas, he would speak out. He would walk picket lines on pornography and abortion, against abortion, things like that. And his church became the largest church in Jonesboro just real quick. And so if they believe that speaking out on issues is going to hurt their church, I think they're sadly mistaken, because I think the opposite is true. Because people lack somebody that will take a stand. They don't lack a mushy, wishy-washy, somebody that just dances around the issue and won't take a stand. Nobody likes that, and so I think most people appreciate it when somebody when they have a pastor or somebody that will take a stand, and I think they admire them and appreciate those. And from my observation, that's what usually happens. I could name you some of the real big churches that's the same way. I think the church out in Texas, the one that First Baptist Dallas, I believe was, where the pastor spoke out on things. I mean, there's no bigger church than that around, I guess. And you can just kind of go on. And those that do, and I'm not saying there's not some that they didn't that have grown, but I think a majority of those that do speak out are the fastest growing or the largest congregations in the country.
I think you're right.
That's my opinion, and that's based on kind of sort of my observation.
Well, historically, pastors spoke out about issues like slavery, civil rights, and temperance, and like for slavery, Wilbur Wilberforce was a Christian, and people, got behind that, and civil rights.
Let me relate the story right quick of Wilberforce. That was over in England, and he got converted, and his pastor was John Newton, who was the former slaver and captain of a slave ship, and got converted, and became a pastor, and I don't know if he's the one that led Wilbur to Christ or not, but he was a member of his church, and after he got converted, he questioned whether he should stay in Parliament or do something else, like strictly, maybe a preacher or something along that line that we think is pure full-time job. And John Newton said, "No, you go back and you serve the Lord in the Parliament." And he did that, and it took him 40 years. But I mean, anybody that thinks slavery is not a what's the word? What would be a good word, Iris, for that?
Political.
No, a devastating,
Cultural.
cultural, mean thing is what can you say about it? But he did that, and it took him 40 years, and he finally accomplished that in England. And that's what one, I mean, I know he had people work with him, but that's when one Christian dedicated to God and not sit back and being quiet about an issue. It was an issue that was important, and he took a stand, and he got that accomplished. And there's so many things that in this country, or any country, I think, that people, if they will get involved, Christian people, and we need the leadership of the churches and the pastors and these issues on this issue stuff about alcohol and about marijuana, the issue that's becoming a big issue, and we had the abortion, and thank God for the Catholics because they were really upfront on this stuff. But we need the leadership of the churches to take leadership in fighting for right and for the good things and against the bad things, and I don't think anybody has got any idea how much power God has given us to accomplish some of the things that we need to accomplish if we will just get in the fight and just do it. Start speaking up and say, no, this is wrong. We're not going to put up with it anymore, and start taking steps. And there are steps on all these things, any of these issues. There are steps that can be taken because there are organizations, the Right to Life organization, they're dedicated to that. And so there's things that can be done there. There are people who are dedicated to this alcohol issue. We're one of them. So a lot of things can be done on any of these issues, but we've got to be willing to take a stand and not worry about what other so-called Christians think, what the world thinks, anything like that. Just get out and do it.
Well, I think what you're saying about leadership is really important because most movements become movements because they have a strong leader behind them,
Yes,
and then people
absolutely.
fill in
Right.
behind that leadership, whether
Right.
it's against alcohol, whether it's against the abuses that happen because of things like alcohol and drugs, whether, we saw the leadership, with slavery issue that started with the preachers, stood up. And in this country, we followed England by about 40 years, I think. They got rid of slavery much earlier than we did. But we had some leadership on that issue, where
Yes.
people could get behind it. And on the the temperance movement, those had strong leaders for them. So our
Absolutely.
problem in this country appears to be a lack of leadership.
I believe it.
People who are
Yeah.
strongly committed and who will stand up and who will get people behind them and say, "Follow me, we're going to fix this."
Yep.
And that's what I see. And it
Well,
should be our preachers because
absolutely.
these are cultural issues.
Well,
And the preachers are the shepherds. They're supposed to take care of their flocks. And if they're not out leading against the damaging cultural issues, then are they really taking care of their flocks?
I maintain they're not. And do they not understand that we would not have the United States if it hadn't been for the Christian people, for the Great Awakening, which led to the founding of this country? So if it wasn't for the Christian people taking a stand, we wouldn't even be here talking right now. We would, I don't know where we would be,
Well,
but we
people don't
wouldn't.
like to admit that. We've got a lot of, I'm sorry, I'm just going to quit being nice. We've got a lot of evil people that say that Christianity, we're not a Christian country, we're never a Christian country. The Christians are a cult, and they say everything ugly about us. And they've just about convinced a great number of people.
Hmm.
When you look at the percentages of people who admit to be Christian, Bible reading Christians now, it is down so much from what it was maybe even in the 40s and the 50s. Um, and that's partially from our political groups, how they've moved away from Christianity. Johnson, who I just called one of the most evil politicians we ever had, he's the one that led us into um, a lot of social programs that have caused problems for people. In the 60s, our Supreme Court ruled against prayer in the schools and Bible reading in the schools. And after that, our education system really went downhill behaviorally as well as scholastically. And I've looked at those scores. Can anybody think that we are better now than we were, at least in our schools, than we were 40, 50, 60 years ago? Mm-mm.
No, just like you said about the prayer in school. I think you and I were talking about one time, and we were talking about how the government had prepared a case, but nobody came and pushed back against it because
Right.
they thought, no, that's not going to happen. No, that's not going to happen. This and it's we've just went downhill since then. And
I Yes, and we've allowed politicians and pseudo politicians, these liberal and leftist leaders. They're not even politicians, many of them themselves, but they're leaders to push back against Christianity in every way that they can, and they have bastardized the First Amendment, which says that the government should have no. I can't quote it. I never quote anything, but it keeps the government out of religion. It says that the First Amendment doesn't allow the government to intrude itself into religion. And so instead of understanding that that was to keep from a state church, now how much has the government intruded in religion by saying you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't have this kind of church, you can't do this, you can't have churches that spend public money for their church schools and things, and all of that came about from people who were took the First Amendment and I think crookedly used it against Christianity, against Christian schools, against Bible reading and things. And I know we had it when I was in school. Nobody ever thought anything about it.
No.
and they think that they keep using the separation of church and state, and a lot of people think that that's in the Constitution, but it was in a letter written by, I think it was Thomas Jefferson to the
To the
Danbury
Danbury Baptist
Baptist
Association.
Association, and that is not in the Constitution.
You,
Well, and
you,
what it did was it assured them that the government would never intrude itself
right.
and make a state church. That was the whole purpose
Yeah.
of he was explaining to the association that the government is never going to come in and say you have to have this kind of a church in the state. You can't have that kind of church. It would not be that way. And actually, we've had more government intrusion into the church now than I can even imagine.
Well,
There's so many people that believe that have been brainwashed, I say, to believe that. And I believe even a lot of pastors and Christian leaders to think that, we're not supposed to get involved in political things, which is one of our big responsibilities because of the things that we've already said. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance. That means we're supposed to keep an eye on our government, not on each other. So if we're supposed to keep an eye on our government, then where does it say that we can't do that? That is our responsibility. And so I think a lot of people have accept that. I'll give you a quick story. There's somebody where I worked years ago, and he was not a dummy, and he actually, we were sitting at the table and talking about something like this, and he actually believed that Christians should not be involved, should not have a right to be involved in politics. Well, I guess I explained to him whatever. He ultimately became a Christian, and so I'm sure he changed on that. But he genuinely thought that we don't have a right to be involved in it. And so how many people out there genuinely believe that? Just wrongly, but genuinely believe it. Not just because they want to believe it, because they've been convinced over so many years of it being repeated and being allowed to be that way.
and we depended on our pastors for so long, and I am looking at an article here, and it's about the end of Southern Baptist campaign against alcohol, and this was written June 20th of 2025, and it starts out: the Southern Baptists who met for their denomination's annual convention last week passed a bevy of resolutions on a number of hot button cultural issues. But one traditional Southern Baptist concern was conspicuously absent from the resolutions: alcohol. Even though this was a year when the U.S. Surgeon General issued a new warning saying that alcohol had been conclusively linked to 7 types of cancer and that even very moderate drinking can have negative health effects, and even though secular media outlets have published numerous articles about the latest findings of alcohol's dangers, Southern Baptists did not comment on the issue at their convention. And I read this last night, and they... I think the last time, let me get that off there. I think says the Southern Baptist Convention's first anti-alcohol resolution was passed in 1886, and when even all the other associations kind of loosened up on that, they've been pretty staunch up until recently. And I noticed, and I've probably said this before on here, I think they all, including Pastor Robert Jeffers, who I really like, I think they've all got the same talking point about it's your Christian liberty to be whether you drink or not. Well, is it Christian liberty to go kill someone in a drunken rage, or domestic violence, or kill a family in a car innocently going home from a trip out to the park? People do not think about these things.
People, I was just talking to someone a couple of days ago, or not long ago. They say, well, long as it, no, it was yesterday, as a matter of fact. Might have been this morning. But they would say, well, long as that, now he was quoting somebody else, but he had kind of believed the same thing. Well, as long as it don't hurt somebody. Well, there's not much you can do that don't affect somebody. You're not, no man is an island. And when you get under the influence of alcohol or marijuana, you're going to affect somebody, and it's not going to be in a positive way. I can assure you that. So there's no way that this whole thing that, well, they're over here and we're over here and it's not going to affect us. It affects us. When you take one person out here and it affects the whole society. You take a bunch of folks and it's going to affect society in a big way. And that's why we're in a national crisis right now with this alcohol. When according to CDC estimates, 1 in 12 people are alcoholics. That, to me, that's a crisis. And I doubt it when I may have said this on the podcast before. When I heard that, I really doubted. I questioned it in my mind. Could that be true? That's so many people, so many alcoholics. And I got to thinking about the alcoholics that I knew or knew of, and then I began to think, that may be true. And I just learned a day or two ago of a cousin of mine that was an alcoholic that I was not aware of. So when I listed, I don't forget how many I knew, but there was a bunch of them. But there's still probably that many more that I don't even. I'm not aware that they are. I know them, but I'm not aware that they're alcoholic. But that is a scary thing. Those people affect everybody. They affect this whole country. When it costs over $800, man, woman, $807 was the last number we had for every man, woman, and child, for these people to be able to go out here and drink and have their fun and do whatever they want to do. And then ours, you keep bringing up the point. Well, yeah, but if that's every man, woman, and child, that $800. Well, what about a family of 4? How much are they paying? But what about all those people who are not paying taxes? A lot of people don't pay taxes, so somebody's paying that amount. So it's just incredible how bad this is affecting us, and yet how much do you hear from the pulpits about it? And when you try to do something, you have some that'll take a bold stand with you, but you have a lot that just sits pretty quiet and will not say anything about such a horrendous thing as this alcohol that's just killing their own people, costing their churches thousands and thousands of dollars every year, depending on the size of the church, how much money. Somebody needs to speak up. Some of these pastors need to get on board and speak up about this.
Yeah, and it's, you sent me an article from the Moody Bible Institute. Mm-hmm. And this is everybody has heard of the Moody Bible Institute. Mm-hmm. And what have they done lately? They have removed their policy against drinking and basically gambling. It says that after a group of faculty and staff recommended policy changes, Moody's employees now have the freedom to drink, smoke, and play a hand of poker on their own time. They still have to avoid behavior absolutely forbidden in the Bible, such as sex outside of marriage, but Moody's decided to make issues that the Bible does not address matters of an employee's conscience. They may still not drink alcohol on the job. And he says, I thought this was interesting. President Paul Nyquist said, we're the Moody Bible Institute, so we're very interested in staying and adhering to God's word. You can't substantiate non-drinking from Scripture. In New Testament times and Old Testament times, there was drinking of wine. You can't get around that. But yet, if he had ever read the Bible, which I would think you would with at working at the Moody Bible
Right,
Institute.
right,
The Bible has a lot to say about drinking. Different places. Wine is a mocker, a strong
right.
drink. It has a lot of things about to say. It does mention it positively in two places that I can remember. Once when Paul tells Timothy to take a little wine for his stomach, and once when Jesus turns water into wine.
All
But
right.
other than that, I can't think of the positive other than well, there's some other areas that would be sidely considered, on the side of effect positive. But the Bible has a lot to say against drinking.
Well,
So, you know,
let me. You've probably seen this somewhere else, but anyway, there is a significant difference in alcohol content between biblical wine and modern wine. Biblical wine was generally much weaker, typically 5 to 11%, and almost always diluted with water, often 2 to 3 parts water to 1 part wine. Modern wine, which is not diluted, generally has a higher alcohol content. Biblical wine, Old Testament, natural fermentation with wild yeast produced a lower alcoholic beverage, usually ranging from 4 to 11% or 12%. It was commonly mixed with water to make it safer for consumption and reduce drunkenness. Modern wine production uses cultivated yeast, additives, and in some cases, fortification to create wines typically ranging from 12 to 20% alcohol by volume, which is much stronger than what was typically consumed in antiquity. While the wine Jesus turned from water to wine was alcoholic, it was not the same in strength as modern high alcohol wines. The practice of dilution means that the overall alcohol intake from a typical serving of Bible era wine was far lower than a standard glass of modern wine. So these people who are saying it's okay to drink wine, they're basically saying it's okay to get drunk based on that information. And I had heard that before, that the wine was a lot stronger now. So, okay, you go out here and it's, 2 to 3 times as strong as the wine in the Bible, and they even diluted it with water then to make sure it
Right.
wasn't.
yeah,
So,
they called it too. There was new wine and old
old
wine
wine, right, exactly,
too.
yeah.
That those were a difference. But back to the Moody Institute thing, this Van Lanningham, who was one of the employees, said after the school lifted its dance ban several years ago, he and his wife offered dancing lessons to prepare for their son's wedding. Likewise, after the school lifted the ban on alcohol, he bought a 6 pack of Mike's Hard Limeade in a Fox Lake supermarket. He said, I felt a little naughty, even though it was okay. Frankly, I hadn't bought liquor for probably 30 years. Now, that tells you what happens when
Yes,
institutions
yes,
back
Yes.
off what they
yes,
require. That tells
yes,
you exactly. Then people go, oh, that's fine. So
exactly.
I'm gonna do exactly what I can do because, if my institution says it's okay, then
Uh-huh.
great.
Yep,
Right.
exactly. That's the type of influence they
Yes,
have. It's a culture of alcohol, and that's what we got now. We've got a culture of alcohol, and nobody thinks it gives it a second thought because what's wrong with it? Everybody does it, which they
It's
don't.
it's
That's
exactly.
what it is.
embedded.
And not only promote it, you know, advertise it and encourage people to do it. Add more alcohol outlets so people can get it easier.
Yeah. And so kids' lives will be ruined.
Absolutely.
I remember you and I talked about you told me about pharmacia or pharmakia,
Yeah.
pharmakia.
Yeah, pharmakeia. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
Greek word, and it's the word that we actually get in English as pharmacy.
So isn't that means drugs, and uh, isn't alcohol a drug? We've been told that.
Yes, it
And
is.
so what does that do? What does that do to? Is that part of? It opens up your mind to different
Yeah, the things that
things.
shouldn't. And I can tell you that that word is used. I believe it's is it in Revelation, um, and it's toward the end times, and they use that word, and it's the only time that word is used in the Bible. In other times, other words are used, and I should have done some research and brought that with me. But it's the only time, and it's directly related to witchcraft
Mm-hmm.
and
Right. It
to
is.
drug taking and everything. And toward the end times, the Bible says everybody's going to be under the spell of drugs and alcohol and everything, and that's when it calls it the pharmakia. So I
Well,
think that's interesting.
it is. It alters the mind. So, you
Yes,
know, I want to be at myself and know what's going on. Um, and
Well,
and all
and
the
this is worldwide too.
yes, yes, it
This
is.
people don't. A lot of people don't consider it. I mean, this is worldwide. People have made fun of the United States for years because we've had these temperance movements. We recognize the problems with alcohol. You go to Europe, and they think that's a crazy attitude.
Yeah,
They don't have
yeah.
the problems that we have. And they teach their kids how to drink early. So that they can grow up drinking and whatnot. And I think a lot of the people over in this country are appalled at that concept. So this idea of alcohol is worldwide, the access to it. And the thing
Yeah.
about it is we're seeing more groups opposed to it, like our group, trying to bring some understanding to it. But we still have people rushing headlong into it, and the alcohol industry is still making billions of dollars on us.
They want to target the young people. I remember there were at my daughter's school, my son's school, they always had some exchange students, and one of them, if I'm remembering correctly, they were in driver's ed, and my daughter was in the car with them, and one of the foreign exchange students was talking about alcohol, and she said, beer, like it was just so delicious to her, like I would think of a Coke. And
When I was back a year or two ago, when I was looking up some of this stuff, and I was curious about other countries, and this is worldwide. This is a worldwide disaster, worldwide crisis. The only country that I remember that didn't have a serious problem with it was, I think, the Muslims. They don't believe in alcohol,
Yeah.
and I think all the other countries had it. I mean, we know about Russia. Russia's just notorious for being alcoholic. Of course, they live under communism, whatever, and I guess it'd make everybody alcoholic to live under that. Some of
Amen.
these young people that thinks it's okay ought to have to go live in Russia for a year or so. But it is a worldwide problem. And the sad thing, the people are making millions off of destroying people's lives.
They are.
And I can
sad.
tell you a little bit of that because when I was married, my husband was in the Air Force and he served a year in Turkey, which is, of course, a Muslim country. And
Right.
he told me right away, he said, Muslims, their religion claims that alcohol is bad, but he said they still drink. He
Right.
said,
Yes.
they're not supposed to, but he said they
Yep.
still drink and they do
Yep.
a lot of other things that their
Yep.
religion says they're not
Right.
supposed to either.
Exactly.
So it grabs everybody.
It
Once you
does.
Yeah.
start drinking,
Exactly.
if you're susceptible to that, it grabs you.
Well, I've said, and there's probably the only way to be sure that you will not become an alcoholic is to never take that first drink. That's the only way you can be sure.
Yeah, that's
There's no other way. There's
100%.
no other way to be sure.
It's like being a little bit pregnant. You can't be a little bit an alcoholic, And um,
You're rolling the dice. You're taking a chance, huge chance with your whole life and your soul even to take that first drink. The better to stay far from it as you can, and from our perspective, we want to keep it as far away from people as we can.
Right.
We know there's going to be, always going to be there some way, but let's put a cap on it as much as we can, so lives will be saved and people will be better off.
and people look back and say, "Oh, the prohibition," and make fun of the people, these temperance societies. And actually, we're not advocating for prohibition.
Not nationwide.
Yeah, we want mainly hearts and minds to be changed, and if the
Well, we want-
voters vote in
Exactly.
that they
The
want to be
local
dry, like we are
county-
supposed to be,
Yeah, supposed
then
to
the
be.
will of the people should prevail. But the conventional view is that prohibition in the U.S. failed, yet this view is not supported by facts. And studies have shown that Americans drank less both during prohibition and after repeal, and also death rates from medical complications of heavy alcohol consumption declined after 1920. So there are some good things, and it was there was really strong support. The preachers, the ministers, they were on board, most of them, and there were like 8,000 local. I guess the various temperance societies, like some of the big ones were like the American Temperance Society. In 10 years, it grew to include 8,000 local chapters and 1.5 million members. and that was in 1826 that it was formed. And
Do you know why they started the temperance movement and prohibition? Why they were sitting around with nothing to do, just twiddling their thumbs. And, we got nothing to do. Let's start the temperance movement. Let's do prohibition, because that's why. Because it wasn't anything bad about it. It was just we got nothing to do, so let's just do this.
it wasn't because of domestic violence, because the
No,
men
no,
got drunk and
no,
beat their wives up.
and
No,
the
I
kids
didn't think
died.
it
No,
was.
no, it wasn't that. It was because they had nothing else to do.
Warn us that you're being sarcastic, Bob, because for a minute there, my eyeballs fell out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But I
you
know
oughta-
the women's temperance movement was begun specifically because of physical violence for men. The fact that men would drink away the money and come home, and they wouldn't have
Yes.
money for food. Thing. They would beat the children, beat the mothers,
Yep.
and that was why the Women's Christian Temperance Union.
That's what I
began.
read. Yep. And it's still active. Did you know that, Iris? They
Yes,
have
it is.
5,000 members in 30 countries. And when it first was in its heyday, I guess, it had 300 and something thousand. But that's right, and we still, it's like Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun. We still have men that go out and get drunk, get the money, lose the money at drinking and whatever, and beat their wives, and the kids they don't have any food, and
Well, this before back when they started prohibition in the temperance movement, there was none of these government programs to support the people.
right.
So this stuff was open. I mean,
That's a
it
good
was
point.
Where the families, you could see the broken families and all that stuff. Now we've got these government programs. So much of it's hidden because the government supports these families, and it can be hidden behind the doors. It's still there. It's just as bad. Matter of fact, worse probably than it was before the temperance movement and before prohibition.
Yeah.
But we don't see much. I believe if we saw it like they did then, I think people would be in an uproar. But now we've just got to try to keep pressing forward and educate people that it is that bad, whether you see it or not. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah.
That it's hidden. It's still there, but it's hidden because of the government programs, and they have housing,
And I
they
think we
food
need to-
stamps, stuff like that.
Yeah, and we need to continue to not to add in these other things, alcohol and other drugs like pot,
Yep.
which are coming along
Yep.
to supplant alcohol with a lot of younger people. Instead of alcohol, they're using pot, and some other chemicals too, and it does the same thing basically.
It does.
So it's still it messes your brain, messes
It
up
does.
your brain, messes your body. You're not fully functional. So we need to get rid of this idea that we've had for so many years, that it's okay to have a couple of cocktails after dinner. It's okay to do this. Your kids grow up and see that, and then they do it. And which kid, winds up being an alcoholic? Which kid gets in a car and kills people? When he's drunk. We got to get rid of this. Got to get rid of this attitude.
Yeah, and I want to before I think we're about to end here. Remind everybody about this book, The Cost of Alcohol, The High Cost of Getting High, How Alcohol Affects Society and Costs You. This is not for people who drink, it's for everybody, but a lot of people think, well, I don't drink, so I don't need that. Yeah, this is for you, everyone, to educate you on just how bad this situation is. Now, this is pretty comprehensive. I mean, there's a whole lot more. It's simple. It's how alcohol affects everything from family to abortion to suicide, and you name it. And this, you don't have to go doing a whole lot of research, but you get this. We'll send it free to you if you'll call 870-910-0464. We'll send this to you free, and you'll learn real quick just how bad it is.
I just want to say that ministers were the backbone of
Yes.
of the temperance movement in the 19th century, and the temperance movement was revitalized by the Second Great Awakening, approximately the 1790s through the 1840s, and the word many was in my research. Many Christian ministers helped establish important temperance societies and organizations like the American Temperance Society. And again, I'm wanting to stress that we don't want alcohol prohibited nationwide. Just like if the voters vote that Craighead is a dry county, we want, the vote to count for something.
Well, we want people to know that they can do something, and that's one of the things they can do. Now, in Missouri, I understand that you can't vote a county or a municipality dry. Because of the is it Bush? What's the big alcohol beer place there in St. Louis?
Anheuser-Busch.
Anheuser-Busch, because they pretty well have control of the state, and so they can't. But here in Arkansas and a lot of states, Texas and maybe most states, people can vote their individual counties dry, and that pushes it further away from them, although you will have bootleggers to contend with, but that's breaking the law, so you can deal with it through the law. Or you can, in Arkansas, you can vote municipalities, a ward, a precinct, any voting district dry here in Arkansas. And we will try to, if anybody's got any questions about that, I want to know how to go about it, we can inform them of that if they will just get in contact with us. But let people know that there is something they can do and what those things are, so they can begin to make a difference and get rid of some of this devastation that's being caused by all this alcohol use.
And churches and pastors are meant to be the tip of the spear. We need leadership. We need pastors to step up. And
I think, in one of the last city council meetings, they approved another 2 liquor permits. Like 70 is not enough in Jonesboro proper, so they had to approve a new. I wonder what the city council would do if half the pastors in Jonesboro showed up at these city council meetings when these liquor permits were being. They don't discuss them. They don't discuss anything.
No.
They just pass the vote. But anyway, if they showed up, face off with these city council members and mayor and said, "We don't want this. It's time to stop."
Yeah,
And I just wonder what would happen.
I think I know.
it would make a difference. Well, everyone, we were talking about for most of American history, the church did not hesitate to speak about the dangers of alcohol. Pastors warned their congregations about the physical harm, the destruction of families, and spiritual consequences of intoxication. Today, they're pretty quiet on it, pastors are, and some of them worry about speaking about issues connected to public policy because of laws like the Johnson Amendment. But the question remains, if the church doesn't speak about the harms of alcohol, who will? And public health experts can talk about statistics. Law enforcement can talk about crime. But the church has always spoken to the deeper moral and spiritual consequences. At Sobering Truths, we believe honest conversations about alcohol are more important than ever. And that includes asking whether pastors should once again lead the conversation just as they did in generations past. And we think they should.
And that's what Jesus said. We're be salt and light.
Right.
And that means you stand for things and you
Yes.
openly stand for things, not hide
Exactly.
behind whatever.
Yep, exactly.
Well, folks, this is the end of another Sobering Truths podcast, and we hope you've enjoyed it. And tune in next time, and we'll have another interesting subject for you.